Hey, welcome everyone. This is the 17th regular meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee. Today's Tuesday, January 6th, and we'll be here from 6 to 8 p.m. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our co-chairs, Destiny and Zach, will facilitate tonight's meeting. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I'm just going to take a moment to go over some Zoom logistics and meeting logistics. This meeting is being live streamed on the city's Office of Management and Finance YouTube channel. But a recording will also be posted tomorrow on the transition website under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning, American Sign Language, and Spanish language interpretation available. To access Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe icon on the bottom right of your screen and select Spanish. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks listening in can see the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit questions or comments through that function. We may not answer all of your questions live in the meeting, but we do read them and they also become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we do have some time held for verbal public comment, but you can submit written public comment at any time by emailing transition@portlandoregon.gov, by calling 311, or through an online public comment form. And with that, I will turn it over to Zach to review tonight's agenda.
Thanks, Julia. So we have a very packed agenda today. Our agenda will include committee business. We'll approve our meeting minutes from our last meeting and review working agreements. We'll have public comment. Following that will be a preview of the city administrator recruitment transition expenses in the fiscal year of 24-25, the transition budget request, as well as annual ongoing costs of the city council, mayor, and city administrator offices. The budget recommendations letter related to council staffing, and finally, improving engagement around the budget. You may notice we are skipping the community engagement updates because we have a very busy agenda tonight. We will add that back in for our next meeting. At the end of our meeting today, we'll close with a brief recap of our next steps. Next slide, please. First step, we'll get to some committee business. So we are aware that Monty is unable to attend tonight's meeting. I also heard from Mobby that she will also not be able to attend. Otherwise, we expect full attendance. First up, we need an echo here. That's your
Really?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you'll be able to. First up, we need to approve the January 10th meeting summary that was distributed last week. Does anybody have any corrections before I entertain a motion? Fred, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I don't need that.
Oh, all right. I'm using that.
Yeah.
Just quickly, I was trying to do my own research and didn't understand that the Portland United for Portland PAC is just a PAC. It is not an LLC that is some other entity. And so the PAC is only registered with the Elections Division, not with the Corporations Division. It's nothing but a PAC. And then in the discussion of, I want to correct myself so that it's not carried throughout the rest of history here. Secondly, I asked if when water and sewer rates increase, if that increases the amount of general fund money through the franchise fee that's imposed on the sewer and water bureaus. And it was misrepresented in the minutes, or just a mistake. It sounds like I asked if there was a way to increase the franchise fee, and that's not what I was talking about.
Okay.
Okay.
Are those the?
That's it.
Okay. And I think we can get those corrected in the meeting minutes. Are there any other requested changes?
I move adoption with those changes.
Yep, go for it, Fred. Is there a motion to?
I just moved.
Excellent. Is there a second? Second. Jose is a second. Thank you. And ask that if you wouldn't mind giving a thumbs up or raising your hand on if you're on Zoom so that we can ensure that we have approval passage. Excellent. I see a majority, so that motion passes. Next slide, please. Now I'll read our working agreements. So our first working agreement, discussions challenge ideas rather than individuals, offer constructive suggestions. We will approach different opinions with curiosity, seek to understand, keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work. 4, arrive on time and be prepared to the best of your ability. Let the group know if you're unable to attend a meeting. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate tools for breathers, though quite honestly, I don't know if we'll have that many today. Keep multitasking to a minimum. 6, keep focus on the objectives of the meeting. Utilize co-chairs to note additional topics for discussion by submitting topics in writing by email. Slide. 7, will honor the decisions of the group. 8, contribute to overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meets your needs. Step up and step back. Collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard. 10, embrace conflict and work with your fellow committee members and staff to find ways to give each other feedback. We'll also, as co-chairs, aim to incorporate various feedback tools. And 11, use I statements. Before I turn it over to Julia to introduce public comment, I want to note that, yeah, I think that's all. Great.
Great. Next slide, please. So this is the time we always have held for public comment. Community members are asked to sign up ahead of time. And we did not have anyone sign up ahead of time. I'm talking slow to see if anyone in the audience might be interested in giving public comment, because we have time and we welcome it. So if you are a virtual attendee, you can raise your Zoom hand. I think folks here are all speaking later. And I'm gonna give like a 5-second awkward pause and let you ponder that. And then we'll either take that comment or move on. Okay, I don't see any Zoom hands. Again, public comment can be given anytime outside of meeting, so we do welcome it. And thank you to our attendees for being here. I think I'm turning it over to Destiny.
Yes, thank you. Our next slide, please. Thank you. Our work plan includes advising on the development of the position description and search process for the future city administrator, including the skills and talents needed in the job description and the recruitment plan for the 2025 mayor to attract, hire, and retain Portland's first city administrator. We only have 10 minutes in this item today. It's just to lay the foundation for a longer discussion at our next meeting on March 13th. And now I will pass it. Orlando Williams, CEO of Modus Recruiting and Staffing, is with us today to present, and we've asked him to share what we should start thinking about before our next meeting regarding this topic more in length. We won't be taking verbal questions and comments, but you can put those in the chat, and Tracy and Christopher from the city's Bureau of Human Resources are here to provide written answers in the chat. Let's see here, and now I can pass it over to Orlando.
Unfortunately, Orlando is not able to make it this evening. And so I don't have much of an update for you, and I apologize about that. He was expected to be here. And so I will need to come back in March with more details. I know that Orlando did present some slides for you all, but they were really to talk about his firm and the skills and knowledge that they bring to the table. And I just don't think that I'll do that justice.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. Tracy Warren, I'm currently the Acting Director for Human Resources.
Okay, well, I guess.
Breather.
Just letting you all know that you have a chance to review some of those slides, and we'll be having on our agenda more discussion about the recruitment.
Thank you.
Give any sense of the timeline?
I do, in that it's similar to what I presented at the last meeting that I attended in November, where we went over kind of the roadmap for the planning. And so what we were hoping for out of this meeting, give a brief introduction. Modus was going to provide kind of some information to this group about what to expect next for how you might be able to participate in the survey for the desired attributes of a city administrator. And then we would bring a finalized plan for discussion at that March 6th meeting. So I think what you'll see is some engagement that will happen offline, making requests to the committee so that we can still come prepared March 6th.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
And
Okay, we got time. You want to go through the chat?
just a.
I just, we've gotten an outline, or maybe it was in November, of a long list of attributes. And so we can start with that. But you'll reach out with a revision that we can then all individually respond to prior to March 6th.
Absolutely.
Great, appreciate it.
Any other questions I might be able to help answer?
I'm just putting in the chat that if anyone has any questions, they can write it and then we'll send them over in between for our next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate your help.
Thank you, Tracy.
Nice to see everyone.
So I will transition it back to Zach for transition expenses.
Yeah, great, excellent. So as a reminder, our work plan includes reviewing and providing feedback on the fiscal year 2024-25 transition budget. We've been presented information on the budget at multiple meetings, including a special meeting on December 18th. We've asked staff to focus on new information that hasn't been previously provided. This includes updated expenses to date, the 24-25 estimated budget request for communications, the 24-25 cost estimates for mayor and council transition and onboarding, an update from facilities on their work, including in district offices, and the small donor elections estimate for the 2024 election. We've asked Chief Administrative Officer Mike Jordan to provide some framing and context for the one-time transition costs of this 24-25 budget request. When Mike is done, we'll have other updates. Please hold your questions until the end of the agenda item. You can also put questions in chat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name's Mike Jordan. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the city. And unfortunately for all of you, I am here. And so you'll have to listen to me for a few minutes. My job this evening is really to give you a little bit of context. You've got a number of folks here who can talk in detail, and you'll have a number of slides around all the issues around both kind of the budget for the project going forward into the next fiscal year and budget information about the transition itself. So I'll let those folks talk about those. But first, maybe just a few contextual comments. Last year, you all know, we spent most of 2023 in what I would call the design phase. And we were able to get to council in November. And not here or
They'll be able to see it.
okay. I thought,
They'll think you're meeting.
wow, scary. Okay. And you all know that in November, the council passed the framework that we're working within. So we were successful in getting a broad design for the future of city government. And going into this year, we're really moving into the construction phase or the implementation phase. We are currently budgeting into that adopted framework that the council adopted in November. We are looking to do a different budget process than we've done in the past, in that we are not necessarily budgeting bureau by bureau by bureau. We are trying to budget as best we can in the context of the service areas. And also in one, we are treating the administrator, the executive office, if you will, where the administrator and the mayor are, we're treating that like another service area. So you'll hear about those things tonight. That budget process, you may or may not know, we're in the budget proposal phase. So our budgets are due to the city budget office in February the 16th. And at that point, the mayor will have all of that and work with the budget office and his colleagues to produce a mayor's proposed budget, which will come out roughly the end of April. And then the council will have the budget in their hands to deliberate in May. And then a number of technical steps we go through to get an adopted budget by the end of June. I would have to describe the process this year as dynamic. It is new for everybody. To give you an example, we would usually turn our budgets in around the end of January. We'd have about a month of interaction with the city budget office back and forth with questions and answers and clarifications of what we had submitted. And then in March, we would usually do work sessions with council to present our budgets and have their questions, and they would make comments that the mayor would be able to use then in the proposed budget that he would be proposing. Well, this year, we're turning in budgets a little later than we did last year, but we're doing the work sessions before we even turn the budgets in. And that is both because we're in the middle of a fairly significant different budget process for transition, but also we're in a pretty challenging budget year, just generally, without transition. The mayor has asked for 5% cuts from all bureaus except for public safety bureaus. And that, of course, is the first. I've been here 8 years. It's the first year that the mayor has asked for cuts in his guidance. So it's a new thing for most of us. And it's, as you know, when you ask for cuts, it creates a bit of turbulence in the organization. And many of our bureaus, especially in my world, in the Office of Management and Finance world, many of our bureaus are almost entirely personnel. And so when you ask for a cut, you're almost talking always about people. And of course, that makes it always a challenge also. I don't know that all those cuts will actually be taken when the mayor ultimately gets all of the information from our proposed budgets and all of the issues that particularly the general fund is facing this year. Then he and the city budget office will attempt to work with his colleagues to make the trade-offs on all of the things that are putting pressure on the general fund and taking into account the cuts that have been proposed. I suspect that some of those cuts will get funded back because they're just too difficult to take. But those are priority decisions that the mayor and his colleagues will have to make ultimately in the budget. As I said before, we're budgeting into the new structure. We are hoping with the approved budget that we will do what I'm calling, for my retail background, a soft launch on July 1st and be able to begin to run the city more like it will run in the future and less like it has run in the past. But you all are aware in November when the council considered the resolution, they also made it very clear that they wanted to retain their commissioner in charge role in the city right through to the end of December of this year. And so we'll be working with their appointees as interim deputy city administrators and working with their offices as we look to implement the new structure. There is no question that creates wrinkles and complications that we may have been able to avoid with a different proposal from council, but that's where we are. And I'm very confident that we can be successful in implementing the framework, beginning to run more like it won't be exactly like it will run with a city administrator and a mayor as the executive, but we'll be able to work most of the kinks out. The second thing I want to say about that soft launch is we have plenty of other things that we are not able to consider in the first budget cycle of budgeting into the new structure. So for instance, after a lot of deliberation, and you'll hear about this a little bit in the presentation, we are likely not to fill the officer roles in this budget cycle. We have, as we have begin to talk through, what do we need to do to actually define the role, actually define what span of control it has, who reports to the officer and who doesn't. Taking communications as an example, we probably have about 80 to 85 communications people in the enterprise of city government. They are not evenly distributed across the service areas, and they report obviously into bureaus right now. The question in the future will be, if we have a communications officer, will all those people ultimately report through management up to the officer and be accountable to the officer, or will they remain accountable to bureaus, or will they be accountable to deputy city administrators in the service areas? So a number of questions that need to be answered, I think, before we fill the positions. So we're really taking a bit of a pause, and we're going to run projects through this calendar year to define those officer roles better and define the authorities and spans of control and reporting relationships in communications, equity, engagement, and now climate and sustainability. And so all those roles are in different starting places because they have different amounts of work that's been done about enterprise level discussions. And they all have very unique characteristics of how they're currently organized. And so we're going to try and take those into account, but run project managed projects out of the transition to try to answer a lot of those questions I've just kind of posed and many others, so that we going into the next budget cycle, which we will start working on late this calendar year, before even the new council and mayor are seated, we'll start working on these questions. And I'm proposing that we will have a second budget cycle where we will be able to answer all those questions and budget into that new structure for those offices. And there are other questions too embedded in some of the service areas that we need to work our way through this calendar year to be ready to propose those answers to the incoming mayor and council. So I think I'll stop there. You may have questions for me before I go sit down and let people who actually know what they're talking about talk to you. But happy to, and I plan on staying through the presentation. So if there are questions later on.
I think, Mike, if you're willing to stick around.
Absolutely.
Pause to have questions, as I imagine there might be more answered.
Absolutely.
throughout the presentation.
Okay.
Thanks.
No worries.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
I think we have next Shannon Fairchild to share the transition expenses and current.
Shannon is online.
Is online. Oh, okay.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Hi. Shannon Fairchild. I am with the Office of Management and Finance. Can you move the slide for me, Julia or June? Okay. So this is a slide that I've presented a couple times. It's just what it shows you is an update on our actuals to date for the charter transition, project management, and administrative team. So that includes the one-time funded transition staff. It's the consulting support for change management. It's community engagement. One thing that is missing from here is communications, as well as voter education and advisory bodies. So the total budget that we have to cover these expenses is about a little over 5.3 million. To date, we've spent about 1.4, and our year-end projections are 3.8 million. So that allows us the ability to carry over 1.5 million next year, which is super important, because that'll allow us to fund, expenses for next year, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Okay, so there are some folks here to talk to you a bit more about communications and onboarding. But the next year's budget, which we presented in kind of different pieces over the past 2 months, for next year for the one-time, it's the one-time funded activities. So that includes a charter transition staff with a cost estimate of about 3.1 million. That assumes positions are funded for the entire fiscal year next year, and it's equivalent to about 16.5 FTE. Change management support for employees. Jennifer, I believe, came earlier and kind of gave a briefing of what's included in that 118 estimate. Community engagement and community bodies, which Julia's worked on and presented, around 63,000, as well as communications, and you'll hear from Daniel here in a moment. And then also included in the budget for cost estimates for next year is a voter education for hard to reach voters, and then just general broader education. So that's a significant portion of the budget, besides personnel, which is the largest expenditure of the approximately 4.1 million cost estimate that we have right now. So when we take our estimated carryover from this year, that leaves, and we take that, so we take the 4.1 million minus the carryover, that leaves us with a delta of about 2.6 million that we're going to need to request for next year. So this will likely come as part of the mayor's proposed or approved. It's not going to be included in the requested budget. And that's because the mayor's guidance stated that we can't request one-time resources as part of the requested budget. So that is really the timing for that. So that funding will be provided as part of the mayor's proposed or the approved, depending on the timing of when we do the spring bump, which is like the mechanism that we have to carry over the funding from the current year. So we will be back in kind of talking through and answering any questions about any updates that we have to these numbers and the process itself. Questions, or wait to the end? And if I think Daniel, you're up after this.
Slide, please.
Thanks.
And before I get started, I just want to say a special shout out and thank you to Amy Randall, who had done a wonderful interview with the Portland Tea Party last week. I thought it was fabulous. And so I just wanted to give a special thanks to Amy and also to the other GTAC members who are going to serve as spokespeople in the near future. So I just wanted to pause and just thank Amy in particular. This slide is about how we were thinking about sort of phasing the communications budget. And so let's look back first as it relates to phase one. And so that was really laying the foundation for the transition. And so examples of that included the establishment of the districts for the IDC, supporting the Independent Salary Commission, establishing the city's organizational structure, establishing a plan for facilities, and readying the city for budgeting into the upcoming fiscal year. And so where we are now, phase two, is I'm calling it as implementing the voter education communications prior to the November election, as well as preparing the city for January 1st, 2025. And so what does that look like? That means supporting this person here to my right on roles and responsibilities for the mayor council form of government. It's a soft implementation of the organizational structure. It's sharing how budget requests are evolving within the city's organization, establishing a monthly communication to employees, which by the way, we just did in January. We are supporting all the change management activities as well as supporting the development of materials for the onboarding efforts. Fast forward to phase three, that begins on January 1st of 2025, which means working with the incoming elected officials and implementing the communications to onboard them into the new form of government. What does that look like? Well, that means literally onboarding the mayor and the council and the incoming deputies and the city administrator, That means continuing the change management activities. That means supporting the budget development for the upcoming fiscal year as we move into the new form of government permanently. We will build and hand off communication systems to the new communications officer and their team, whatever that looks like, and build and hand off any new communication systems that we build into the service areas that are currently lacking communication staff. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what the communication support looks like in the various phases. Next slide, please. And so as it relates to how I sort of budgeted the communication expenses line by line, I'm happy to go through them. The first one is centralizing technology. I talked a lot about how in the past, when presenting the communications plan, that the city has no single way of establishing media relations activities or social media activities. We're all sort of doing our own method as it relates to how we tweet or how we send press releases, et cetera. And so what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to centralize all of that activity by introducing a new tool called Cision. And so $20,000 on an annual basis will allow us to do that. That will also help amplify and expand our current and existing media and social media related activities, including helping us reach national outlets for the first time in a more direct way. In addition to that, I'm able to see misinformation that's happening out there, as well as earn more metrics and analytics on what our multicultural audiences are hearing and saying about us. So that gives my team and the city a better opportunity of being able to pinpoint and see where that misinformation is coming from, and then being able to remedy that situation. So that's what centralizing technology means. Video development, part of that is to support Sophia and the voter education videos prior to the upcoming election, and additional videos after January 1st, 2025. The good news is that a lot of the video stuff we have in-house, and so you'll see that I'm carrying over the money in the next budget year. As it relates to social media buys to support the voter education efforts, we're looking to promote the voter education videos that we are building this spring, and then amplifying it across our social media channels. So that's paid advertising. In addition to that, we also are hoping to not only translate, but also work with our multicultural media outlets. Slavic Radio is one of those that comes to my mind, among the many others that this group has shared their ideas in terms of who to reach out to. That's what I mean by multicultural media buys, is when we actually place ads and help promote the videos to those listeners. Translation, self-explanatory and ongoing interpretation work, $20,000. As it relates to onboarding communication, it's developing a number of informational materials. So this includes the printing, the branding, the multi-day orientation as it comes to welcome those elected officials. It's also onboarding elected officials, executive leadership, employees, and Portlanders. Portlanders are going to be experiencing this new form of government for the very first time. And so that's what this sort of bucket of money is for, is to help with the onboarding components of it, hard costs. And then I have as-needed communication support as well as needed graphic design. So for communication support, that might be their ongoing as-needed community engagement support. I mean, that could be anything. That could be holding meetings by district in the new form of government. I'm unsure, and so I'm holding those sort of buckets of money there. As it relates to as-needed graphic design, we only have one graphic design and a graphic designer on the transition team, but a number of asks. And so that bucket of money is to help relieve our graphic designer so that she can work on other things as well and juggling a ton of tasks and requests. I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. So is this the right, next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I'm Tate White. Pronouns are she, they, and I'm a strategic projects manager with the transition team, as many of you know. I'm managing and overseeing projects that are responsive to the new roles and responsibilities outlined for our elected officials, as well as the desired outcomes of the Charter Commission. This includes updating council operations and procedures, staffing structures and budgets, and planning for onboarding of the new elected officials, as Daniel referenced. Regardless of the charter changes, we always incur costs when we have transitions of elected officials. And so I want to note that this budget is being considered separate from the other transition one-time costs, because we have this happen all the time, regardless of those changes. The last several transitions have ranged between $130,000 to $200,000 per office. So the total on this is actually lower than we typically have. A fiscal year 2022-2023 budget note directed the budget office to establish a policy set aside to account for council transition costs of up to $500,000 to ensure adequate funds would be available for any voter approved transitions. On the slide, you can see our current estimates for costs associated with transitioning one mayor and up to 4 commissioners out of office and welcoming up to 12 councilors and 1 mayor into the office. Even though we had that budget note for a policy set aside, our current budget office has asked us to submit this as a decision package. So we'll probably be coming with the mayor's proposed. So on the slide, I'll just quickly walk through the line items. Technology services, that's the largest line item because it covers new computers and cell phones and includes licensing fees and labor costs for setup. And that is a big job for this expanded council. Facility costs outside of ergonomic chairs are covered by the facilities city hall renovations budget. So that's good because that usually does need to come out of this budget. But we are going to budget for those chairs and other adaptive technology needs, as you see on the slide. Typically, $5,000 is spent on one elected official swearing in ceremony. So we are budgeting for 13 times that amount for a joint ceremony of all the new electeds. And onboarding activities happening in 2024 will come with costs related to facility rentals, security, and food and refreshments. We are also budgeting for optional stipends for the voluntary participation of the future elected officials, because we don't know if these new electeds are going to be able to leave their day jobs to do an onboarding activity before they're in office. So for 2025 onboarding costs, we are budgeting for potential costs to support up to 6 tours, roughly 1 for each service area for each of the 4 districts, and then other related meetings. We are budgeting for a contingency for these mayor and council transition costs because there are still so many unknowns and things in flux. And so we want to be able to be prepared for additional costs that are needed, because we do really see this as a crucial part of supporting the new elected officials and setting them up for success. All right, that's it for me. Happy to answer questions when we have that opportunity.
Thanks, Tate. I think we have Maddie now here to speak to facilities, and then we'll be able to answer questions. So continue to plug them into chat. And if you have specific questions for any individual, feel free to indicate that as well.
Hi, I think I've met you all before. For the record, my name is Maddie Sauter and I run the Division of Asset Management. So that's fleet and then pretty much the downtown and public safety facilities. So I was asked to come to give an update on in-district offices. I will also say a brief update on City Hall. We have just received the GMPs 1 and 2. We are working through those right now and should have something posted and ready for public consumption in about 2 weeks so that you'll have information on those cost estimates. So back to in-district offices, if you want to go to the next slide. Julia asked for a brief update, and can you hit the slide one more time? This is from October of 2023. Some of you may remember our presentation to council on this. There was a lot of discussion about their interest in in-district offices. We left our first work session with them with the directive to come back with a concept sketch about where district offices could go for our second work session. And this slide was presented in that work session, showing some ballpark ideas that we had developed with Commissioner Ryan's office about where those in-district offices could be located. So it was a series of potential ideas that we were directed to explore. As you know, we also vocalized, I think in the first October work session, some concerns, if you would like to go to the next slide. And those concerns really related to programming costs and schedules. So from a programming standpoint, At the time, district offices had just been, or district boundaries had just been defined, and so we did not really know where the district should even go. But I think more than that, we had a lot of concerns about the fact that we didn't have anybody who would be using these facilities on board to help inform the programming. And so everything from geographic location, access to transportation, what the facilities would look like, what kind of adjacencies they wanted. Should they have childcare? Should they have access to community rooms? Security profiles. There's lots of things that you would involve an individual or group of individuals in for programming, and we didn't have those individuals on board. So we had a lot of concerns about how we would develop an appropriate scope, particularly considering our initial cost estimates for these sites. So wherever you have programming uncertainty, you also have a lot of cost uncertainty, and time and programming uncertainty have really been the enemies of all facility projects for this entire effort because of the extremely compressed timeline. So our initial estimates for these offices were around $3.5 million, and that just seemed like a lot of money to spend on something that we didn't have a lot of certainty about. And then our team itself, we have a team of 3 people that does all of our tenant improvements. So that's everything from the city hall remodel to in-district offices to basic moves. So lots of concerns about this on our part, but we were pleased that Commissioner Ryan's office brought forward some ideas that really helped us because we don't typically do sort of robust community engagement. That's not our focus. We are an internal service organization. So that really did help sort of expedite at least the search for those properties. So what we have now found, if you'd like to go to the next slide, is that some of these options look viable and some of them do not. So in districts 2 and 3, Kenton Firehouse and Southeast Uplift are both viable facilities. All of these facilities require some level of work within them in order to make them work for the purposes defined. However, on District 4, Multnomah Arts Center was not viable, and Northwest is not exactly, it's well positioned, but we're not exactly sure that it has access to something called the Rose Network, and that's going to be important here in just a minute, so put that in your noggin. And so with that, we are also looking at another site, which frankly is up at the 1900 building where we have a vacant office space that's sort of a retail location on the first floor that might work for District 4 purposes. Where we really are getting into trouble is, I would say somewhat predictably, in District 1. So I think this entire conversation probably sprouted because individuals in District 1 don't always feel like they have a lot of access to downtown spaces. And indeed, we're finding a lot of trouble locating a space in that area. So we've self-defined some transportation connectivity that we're looking for. And we've defined that we want it to be an already built out building to minimize tenant improvements, but there's just very few facilities available. We've reached out to the county to ask about Midland Library. We've reached out to our partners at the state. There's just not a lot out there. And so of course it creates even further concerns for us about, if we're putting money into this location, is it really going to do what that community wants us to do? Where should it be located, et cetera? A lot of the best options are right at the very edge of the boundary on the western side. So it's almost like they're not really even in the district. So it's a very big quandary for us at this point in time. So go to the next slide, please. So summary of the programming, again, sort of the districts that always have good options remain to have good options. The district that doesn't have good options doesn't have good options. But where we are getting a little bit hung up again is on the cost element. So one of the things we had vocalized back in October is a strong concern about having a distributed security model. So we did a survey of 37 different cities. None of them are pursuing in-district offices because of the exact same reasons we're not wanting, really honestly, to pursue them, which is you take a security profile that is already very difficult to service, and then you spread it all over the city. And so that quadruples or actually quintuples when you add City Hall to security officers to security cameras. Those security cameras have to be on the city's fiber network, the ROSE network, in order to have interoperability with our security operations center. So if they want to have real-time response and monitoring, you have to be on that network. And that just pushes the costs way up. So we are currently engaged in a conversation with the current council about security. Essentially, what do you want to leave these new entrants with? Do you want them just to have a card table at the Kenton Firehouse? Or do you want them to have a facility that if they go to it in their neighborhood has the same level of security assuredness that you have downtown? I don't want to be in a situation where somebody goes to their local office and feels like they're going to be secure. And in fact, they're not secure because it was going to cost $2 million to make it secure. And I don't want to spend $2 million unless we know that that's where those people want to be and that the site is what they want it to be. And so I think we're in this situation where, at least personally, I feel like we have the cart before the horse, that I guess I would maintain our original position that we don't necessarily want to spend this money until we have the individuals who will be affected, involved, and engaged for programming. But of course, we are here to do what council is directing us to do and what you are directing us to do, which is to find an optimal balance. I guess if we can't, if there are no great options, I guess I would say. So we have been meeting with council on this topic periodically. We had our last meeting with council chiefs on this last Thursday. They are actually very interested in your input on this. So I know that they are curious what you have to say. I indicated that you have a committee, I think, that's been working on this. Julie and I discussed it. And so they would be very interested in seeing that committee's recommendations coming forward, because I think council right now is on the fence a little bit, recognizing that there's this tension between wanting to provide these spaces that people were expecting and the realities of what those spaces may be from a cost and security standpoint without necessarily having all of that programming laid out. So to the degree that the subcommittee working on this can provide information and insight and, perhaps funnel it through Julia or discuss it when it's appropriate, I think that they're very interested in that input. I think they're actively soliciting your information and would like you to be a co-owner in that decision.
Thanks, Maddie. I apologize to Susan. You have a presentation, I believe, about our small donor elections program. And so if you could keep your conversation or your topic brief so that we have time to have questions at the end, I appreciate that.
Sure. How brief is the ideal amount of brief?
We have really 5 minutes for questions and your presentation. So if you can keep it to a couple minutes, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, I'll do my best. First of all, Small Donor Elections is the program that enables candidates to run for office without accepting the influence of large contributions by collecting small contributions from Portlanders and their related 9-to-1 match on the first $20 alone. It has to budget a little bit differently from other programs. It doesn't fit very nicely into the fiscal year structure because election cycles are 2 years and the election period over which we elect all city offices is 4 years. So we take what we need over 4 years of elections, divide it by 4, and ask for a quarter of that each of those years. That way, we don't have really small budget asks in the years when there isn't an election, a big budget ask when we elect the auditor and a couple of council members, and then a massive budget ask when we elect the mayor and a couple of council members. That's hard on council in terms of appropriating, but it's also makes the program have no clue until they're 3/4 of the way through the election cycle if it has enough money to even stay solvent. So we instead ask for a quarter of what we need each year for 4 years, and then carry forward any balance from the prior year. And that system works, except when there's a charter amendment that massively changes how elections work. So what happened is that by going from 3 elections every year, right, mayor and 2 council, one in the presidential election cycle years and auditor and two council in the midterm election cycles to not just 7 offices every other year, but 14 offices, all 14 in 2024. That change alone just dramatically balloons the cost of the small general elections program because almost all the money we are appropriated and spend is for the matching funds for the candidates. Because all we really do is we distribute the matching funds to the candidates. But there are aspects of charter reform that did decrease the cost of elections by like going to district-based elections and eliminating the primary. So the Portland Elections Commission, which it's within its members has some of the most accomplished and respected campaign experts in the state. They made a bunch of educated guesses about how the charter reform is going to affect the cost of the program. They could have made a budget request that would be very safe and we would know for sure we would not run out of matching dollars before the election. But to be safe, we would have to ask for what was potentially millions of dollars more than what was necessary. So instead, what they did is they provided a conservative estimate that if that amount of funding is provided to the program, it might still not be enough. And they might still have to engage in the insolvency protection measures, which is to lower the total amount of matching funds each individual candidate is even eligible for. We're already more than a year into the election cycle, and so they've had to already reduce that amount. And it was meant to be reduced moderately in case of moderate underfunding of the program, but because of the dramatic increased cost to the program, because by going to so many offices elected in 1 year, they've had to make dramatic reductions, which they will increase. They'll increase, reduce, they'll restore some of that if they get additional funding. But the mayor's race, you normally can get $750,000 of matching funds if the candidate earns that much. For a race that costs about $1 million. So between private funding and the matching funds, it gets them pretty close to that amount. That instead of being eligible for $750,000, they had to reduce that to $100,000 until we find out if the program gets any additional funding. And then for the council and auditors races, the matching funds caps had to be reduced by 60% to 40%. Not being able for candidates in the program, not being able to raise enough to run a competitive bid for office without kind of needing to rely on political spending by people who can raise and make huge political contributions really undercuts the ability of the program to achieve its purpose, which is to give Portlanders confidence that its democracy and its government is working in the interest of all Portlanders, not just the interests of large donors. So that's where things are, is there's this conservative ask that is a dramatic increase from what the program normally receives just for 2024. And hopefully things get a little, closer to what the program normally would after that, because the increased cost of charter reform should be offset at least partially by some of the savings in charter reform.
Thank you for that context, Susan, and I appreciate you keeping brief. So we do have quite a few questions for everybody, and we're short on time. So I want to be conscious of the fact that we want to touch on some of our other agenda items, but I want to make sure that we can answer some of the questions that we have with folks that are here. So I'm going to try to do my best to identify those who are physically here and maybe those who are virtual. If you see questions in the chat that you can immediately respond to, please do so, and that can be in part of our meeting record. And for those of you who might have asked it, you can see in chat. So let's see here. We had a question. I'm haphazardly going through, so I apologize if you're were first. Jane, you had a question on in-district offices. Good to have identified some possible locations. Appreciate that it's difficult to plan budget given that those unknowns. Could be that this comes later. It may not even be a question. I apologize. But there might be others, so let me try to find other districts oriented ones. There was a question, I believe, for about district offices. What are the difficulties with Multnomah Arts Center? Or if there's district offices, is it possible for doing more targeted engagement, either GTAC or city council, I would imagine, to understand the desire for district offices? I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing Leah. To my knowledge, there isn't a question that Portlanders have been invited to provide much feedback on it, and it might be nice to have broader opinion pool before offering recommendations. So I don't know if you have any insights into maybe council's work on soliciting the impetus for the in-district work.
Well, I don't know that council was the impetus for this work. I think it was more the Charter Commission sort of manifested that idea, and then it was declared in the voter pamphlet and became kind of a core expectation of charter change. And it is my understanding. I know Commissioner Ryan, when he brought it up in October, was really building off of that expectation of this is what was promised. How will this materialize? And I don't know much more beyond that in terms of where the idea originated or how it materialized. Perhaps Julia could speak to that, since I believe she was involved with the Charter Commission. But I will say, you know, given the fact that so few other cities do this, I think it's worth asking ourselves, what were we really trying to accomplish with this? Was it a specific demographic? Was it a specific geography that felt sort of like it could not access what was downtown? Was it a specific frustration at feeling like maybe we don't have control over budget or control over council? I don't know. And so that is an area that is a little bit beyond facilities purview. As an organization, we are an internal service fund that builds police precincts and city halls. However, we would be very interested, and maybe that could be the GTAC's role, at learning more about what the impetus for that idea is, who is interested in it now, and what does that really mean? I've thought about other ideas if we want to create access to government. For example, I keep thinking about the RV, where you can put a really cool wrap on it and you can drive it around the city to Sunday parkways and movies in the park and Fred Meyer and boater drives. If it's getting into the community, there's different ways to do that are not hard-coded security threats. Pop-up locations, for example. So we would be very interested in receiving that information. And I think probably the only challenge for that is that if we are to have these offices on board by January 1st, we are on a ticking clock in terms of leasing a property, doing particularly the Rose network connectivity required to stand up security cameras, badge access, et cetera, and any tenant improvements that are expected, along with signage and advertising. So much like with City Hall, our clock is ticking if that expectation needs to be met by January 1st. And then we are really not a well-positioned organization to do that type of broad community outreach, just given our professional scope. So I might look to the GTAC for guidance on that, actually.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. I think we have a question for maybe Tate White and Michael Jordan.
I just answered it.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, fabulous.
This is an incredibly dynamic chat, so I apologize for being very, yeah, I'm challenged to be able to stay on top of it. Thank you all for being engaged.
So,
Yeah.
can I just, since I'm not facilitating, I
Yeah.
have had the pleasure of reading the chat. And I will say the vast vast majority of it was in response to Maddie's presentation on facilities and in-district offices. And I put this in the chat, but I want to say it aloud and for folks listening in. The next meeting of the districts and council operations subcommittee is February 22nd. And that meeting is primarily about planning our upcoming community engagement activities, because that subcommittee is going into their gathering public input phase, and their scope of work encompasses this conversation. So anyone is always welcome, whether you serve on that subcommittee or not. And regardless, that subcommittee will be coming back to the full committee with that engagement plan. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, well, since we do have you two here, I'm going to try to find questions for you. I think there was a question. I had a question actually, and so I'm going to take the privilege of being a co-chair to ask it. So apologize. But I'm curious. You know, we're in a constricted budget cycle, and that makes technical revisions to decrease budget that is maybe less visionary than we had intended with this transition. And so I'm curious if you have a suggestion for us as an advisory body or other members in the community in making recommendations for the budget so that new bodies and services are adequately and serviced so that they can live out this kind of like new service bucket, if you will, that you were talking about with the city administrator. If you have any suggestions so that it's not kind of falling on deaf ears, I guess.
Well, process-wise, I'll say first, the city budget office and the mayor in their instructions are allowing decision packages for transition. So that's one of the few things they're allowing decision packages for. And so we have some prepared to try to make sure that the administrator, the executive office, if you will, can operate. And you may recall that one part of the office, a very significant part, is called Portland Solutions. And it encompasses a number of programs that are currently in the budget. It isn't that they're not budgeted for, but most of them are currently funded with one-time dollars. And so those are some of the real rubs that occur. But Ben is here also and prepared. There are packages that have been prepared for the operation of the administrator's office and the service areas regarding transition. So the deputy administrators and some administrative support for them, and then the officers. And we're holding the officers till next year, which takes some pressure off the rest, which is helpful. But it is the one area that the mayor and CBO are allowing decision packages for, and we will take those up in the mayor's proposed. So there isn't the time crunch for the submitted budgets, which are February the 16th. We will have the period from then until probably realistically until early to mid-April to have some influence over those packages. So it's a little better than if you had to influence between now and the 16th of February. So, which is helpful.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Help me with other questions that you might have seen that we should ask. I was thinking.
Just a moment.
Oh, yeah, Fred's question. So
The second budget.
yeah,
You said something about as you're trying to get these sundry bureaus heretofore immensely siloed into these service areas. You mentioned a possible second budget. What was it?
Second cycle. Well,
Where does that fit
maybe,
in?
yeah, I appreciate that. That may be my vernacular and I should explain it a little better. We are currently going through a budget cycle, regular budget cycle, and we are budgeting into the framework that the council passed in November. After November, we asked each of the service areas, with the commissioner in charge convening discussions about each service area which has a number of management and organizational questions within each one, and some more than others. So for instance, Public Works is really just the current environmental services, the current Water Bureau, and the current Bureau of Transportation, without a lot of tinkering, let's put it that way, in them. So there aren't a lot of second tier changes that might need to happen there, at least not currently. If you look at my office, for instance, the office of the Chief Administrative Officer, it ceases to exist July 1st. And all of the things within it are being put somewhere else. And so there are a lot of second tier management decisions and organizational decisions. We're currently envisioning the Spectator Venues program to go to economic and community development. Well, does it stand alone and reports to the deputy city administrator? Is it folded into one of the other bureaus from a management perspective? So those kinds of second tier questions, we won't get to all of them in this budget cycle. And so when I say a second budget cycle, I'm really talking about the next budget cycle, 25, 26.
All right.
And what we will do this year, at least what I'm anticipating the work plan that we will have, is we will begin to examine those questions along with these four officer questions. And we hope to make a proposal for that next budget cycle. We'll begin working on the budget actually quite early the next cycle, because we'll have a lot of history about how we've been working towards this transition. And we will put together budget packages for the next council and the next mayor for that budget cycle to be considered in the spring of 25. So that's what I refer to when I say the next second budget cycle, second cycle of change, if you will.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate you both, and thank you all for the presentations, both online and here. We're going to jump back to our presentation and cover some slides that are probably very close to being answered and very relevant to our conversation at this very moment. Destiny, take it away.
Thank you, Zach. As a reminder, our work plan includes items related to annual ongoing costs of the city council offices, mayor's office, and city administrator's office, particularly our roles to advise on future council operations and future council districts and offices, and to recommend how to enhance community participation and inclusion in the mayor and city administrator's offices. This section will go to 7:20, and I'll turn it over to Ben Smith and Shannon Fairchild. We will take comments and questions after the presentations are done. Thank you.
Ben Smith, Office of Management and Finance. I am the financial analyst for the four council offices currently and the mayor's office. So what that means is I help them make their budget, and then I'm also helping them monitor their budget through the year, tracking, hey, they want to potentially hire a staff member. What would that cost? Does that fit within their budget? I want to walk through what those new budgets look like on the next slide. So for the current council offices, they have a 6-month budget running from July through the end of December. We are closing out those budgets once those offices leave, making sure that, we're covering items like vacation payouts, making sure we're cleaning up all the existing contracts, purchase orders we have. And as we transition to the new council budgets, those are our 6-month budgets running from January through June of 2025. What the city budget office has provided us is a revenue base of $282,000. That $282,000 is really split over what we call these 3 major object codes within the city. That's personnel costs, external costs, and internal costs. The personnel costs, the 282 is meant to cover the new elected official that's being hired, along with a senior staff representative. The external costs, which are roughly $10,000 for the 6-month period, those are costs outside the city. So think of office supplies. Someone wants to go to a conference. We have a lot of contracts right now for translation services if one of the elected officials is doing an event in the community. And then there's like software costs like Office 365 that we have to pay annually. There's then the internal costs for each of their budgets, which is roughly $80,000. Those cover all the charges that are coming from other city bureaus for the most part. So that's your space rent for City Hall. Right now, we have the 4 council offices. We'll have 3 elected officials and staff in each of those offices. Printing costs, the city has its risk funds for insurance, financial and administrative support. So that's a share of the work that I do, along with our administrative staff who is going to be helping with their, what we call a procurement card, really a debit card that you would be used to. Timekeeping, helping with travel forms, that sort of thing. And then the technology equipment. So there's annual or monthly charges for items like your email, server space, things like that. The key decision point when these new elected officials take office is how much they want to pay that senior staff representative. So right now, the city has very wide pay ranges. We know what the new counselor is going to make. That's already been set by the Salary Commission. The senior council aide, the range for that can start at $82,000 currently and go up to $124,000. So the key decision point for that council member will be, what do they want to hire their staff person at? Obviously, hiring at the top of the range means they're pretty much stuck with this $10,000 for this half year or the $80,000 for internal costs. If they want to hire more towards the lower of the range, those external and internal costs we could budget more there. The one thing I would say to that though is I've been working with the council offices for 8 years now. City Hall is a very small place, and when the elected officials come in, they have a staffing plan and say, okay, this person's going to be at $90,000. This person will be at $60,000. Inevitably, what I've seen is what I would call salary inflation. When they start talking to the other offices or their colleagues, they find out what someone else generally makes. And many times over the first couple months, I've gotten, hey, can we get in touch with our HR representative that they have? We want to bump up this person to match the salary of someone who they view as doing similar work. So I always kind of keep that in the back of my mind when I'm going over these budgets, knowing that, hey, in a few months, once they get into office and kind of see what's going on, that they may want to bump up those salaries, and we got to make sure we're leaving room for that. I did want to note too, we had a pretty extensive process with Barry Pack, who was with the mayor's office, and other people within OMF about going over all kinds of different scenarios of what these new offices could look like. We at one point had costed out what a council member and 2 staff looks like. Ultimately, what was funded, at least initially here in our Cal target, which is the starting point for your budget, the 282, that was just to cover the 1 elected official and the senior staffer. If we could go to the next slide, the 1.48 million, this is for the mayor's office for the 6 months. The current mayor with approximately 20 staff, they have their 6-month budget. The 1.48 is the 6 months for the new mayor's office. That new mayor's office has 6 staff members, including the mayor, a chief of staff, a senior aide, 2 council aides, or 2 mayor's aides, and then an administrative support specialist. We budget $100,000 for the 6 months of the mayor's office for external costs. Those are, again, really the same costs that I talked about last time, just on a bigger scale there. And then for internal costs, this number is much higher. And the reason it's much higher is for a couple of reasons. One is there is a security program exclusive to the mayor's office. That is, I think this current fiscal year is around $450,000. And then also the other difference being the mayor currently gets a city assigned vehicle. So we're paying, even if that vehicle has been paid off, we're putting away a monthly amount so that when that vehicle in theory reaches the end of the useful life, there's a reserve there. So we're not saying, hey, here comes the new mayor. Here's the the car doesn't work anymore. Here's a $40,000 bill for a new car. We're trying to plan to make sure there's reserves in place so we're not setting the next person up for a big financial hit. So those are the 6-month budgets. You would roughly take, so for example, when we move to 25-26, you would take that 1.48 million, you would double it for the full fiscal year. And then the city budget office applies inflation factors to that starting revenue budget. So for example, if the PERS costs, if there's a PERS rate increase, if there's an increase for other inflation taxes or things like that, benefits, that amount does get adjusted. So our starting point for next year, everything else being equal, will be the 1.48 times 2 plus some, 3-4% inflation for how those tax costs looks like PERS. Also, they factor in external costs of goods and internal costs for the city. Like if facilities is going up by a certain amount for space, something that, for Maddie's group, there would be a inflation factor that would play into what those targets look like. So those are the kind of brief rundown of what those 6-month budgets look like. I'm happy to answer any questions now about that.
We also have the city administrators.
We want to have Shan go and then we could circle back.
Yes. And so I will pass it over to Shannon.
Hi there. Hi, Shannon Fairchild, Office of Management and Finance. We have, so for the city administrator's office, you would ask us to come and talk about the ongoing costs. So we'll talk about what is going to be included in the requested budget as well as in the proposed. So the mayor's guidance in budget memo 2 said we can ask for resources, but it would be limited to just things that are related to charter reform. And so that is with the assistant city administrator position, that will be a decision package. And that will be funded with a combination of realigning existing funds from the Office of Management and Finance Deputy City Administrative Officer, as well, and then we'll be requesting the difference for that position. And so that assistant city administrator will be reports to the city administrator, is what and oversees will be bureaus that we're reporting to. The assistant city administrator will include, I believe, the Office of Equity, Civic Life, Portland Solutions, and maybe OEHR. I can't remember. I'll put it in the chat when I find it, but there's been some movement there. But that is the position will be requested as part of the decision, as a decision package in the requested budget. The next piece is unified communications. So this was in the original November 1st fiscal impact statement and the new org chart. It was a bigger package. It was about 1.7 million. This has been scaled back to about 4 FTE and 763,000. It also realigned some existing resources from within the current budget, that there is a position that a person that is working on citywide communications right now. And so that part of their salary will be moving over to fund this kind of starting point for a citywide communications team that would exist. There is a pilot program going on right now that has limited term staff. And so this would give a manager 2, funding for a manager 2, as well as ongoing position authority and ongoing funding to make that team have ongoing resources. It currently is funded with one-time resources. And so that would be something that that it's going to be part of the requested budget that has direct nexus to what was in the org chart and as part of charter reform. Mike talked a bit about how we're kind of pushing the exploratory pause button on the sustainability engagement Actually, this is a typo here. It should say sustainability, engagement, equity officer positions. Going to do some work over the next year to define those, and you'll see those in the subsequent budget. And then we also talked a bit about this in another slide as well, but just to recap, for the one-time funding, work that's going on around the project management and transition team, that whatever is not funded with carryover, that request will be part of the proposed. And so that is kind of the cycle with how that one-time funding will work. So 2 decision packages in the requested that have direct relation to the org chart, pausing on officer positions, and then for the charter transition one-time funding budget, that will be part of the proposed budget.
Thank you, Shannon. So we are at time for this section. Please put questions in the chat. I want to hold the time we set aside for the budget recommendations letter. So again, thank you, Shannon. Please use the chat feature to get all your questions in. And we will transition. Next slide. Now, we will consider the budget recommendations letter on city council staffing in this section. Next slide, please, June. For context, at the January 10th Government Transition Advisory Committee, a motion passed directing the districts and council's operations subcommittee to discuss and draft a letter to the mayor and city council that first recommends that the budget for council staffing be increased to be in line with staffing levels at peer cities. Second, acknowledges the need to better staff for community engagement. Third, acknowledges budgetary constraints and offers suggestions of how the council operations budget could be reallocated to fund such staffing. And fourth, is delivered by February 16, 2024, so that it will be considered in the budgeting process. We asked GTAC members to come to today's meeting prepared with any questions or proposed revisions to the draft letter. But before we take any questions and proposed revisions, we want to give the subcommittee co-chairs, Julia and Jose, an opportunity to introduce their work and share any important context. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Destiny. As you consider the letter, please know that the Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee purposely drafted a short and focused letter. We removed any information not related to the key points. We know there's always more information that could be added, but we believe in this case, in many cases, brevity is important. Beyond succinctness, there are 5 important considerations we want to highlight. First, we use a liberal definition of council staffing that is inclusive of both council aides who directly report to the councilors and shared council staff and other supports necessary for a functioning city council. Second, we found that there is insufficient staffing for both individual councilors and shared operations and legislative functions, including staffing for the council presidents, for instance. The finding is based on our extensive research on council staffing in peer cities. Third, we debated, but ultimately decided against including a specific number of increased staff, in part because our primary point is based on our research. No other city has a low level of staffing that is being proposed. Also, the group has consensus that we need more staff. Fourth, we declined to weigh in deeply into where the funding for additional staffing can be found. The city budget office outlined several strategies to city council at a budget work session about how to fund these expenses, and we defer to the city budget office expertise. We're not the experts here. Fifth and finally, we showed restraint in elaborating on staffing for improved community engagement, in part because it's really a much broader thing than council staffing, including district offices, district coalitions, place-based city programs. But now I'll pass it to Julia to share our tasks.
Thank you, Jose, and good evening to everyone out there. We have 2 requests of the GTAC tonight in regards to this letter. First of all, we request approval of the letter on council staffing and would like it sent to the mayor and council to ensure that the letter is timely with the budget process. Second, we would like to direct a few volunteers to come to the next GTAC meeting with a proposed scope, outline, and audience for a separate targeted letter that recommends improvements to community engagement. We believe a second letter is necessary because improvements to community engagement are inclusive of, but not limited to, council offices and may include topics such as the work of civic life, the future role of neighborhood district coalitions, budgeting for district offices, or some other in-district events like town halls, and staffing for improved community engagement writ large. We don't think it's time to direct volunteers to draft a letter yet, but we do think it's important to make progress towards that purpose. We also don't think this falls squarely in either subcommittee because community engagement is so cross-cutting across the board. I believe that Juanita from our subcommittee is prepared to make a motion for volunteers to work on a letter, scope, outline, and audience when the time is right. In general, I'll note that the subcommittee believes that the GTAC should get into the habit of writing recommendation letters on a regular basis and reporting our findings in a timely manner. And with that, I will turn it back to Destiny.
Juliet, next slide. Okay, we will now take questions and proposed revisions. You don't need to speak to minor changes, just put those small edits in the chat. If you agree with someone else's comments, please note your agreement with the +1 in the chat and a reference to the person who recommended it. I'm going to pause for a moment for folks to consider whether they have something to share. Please raise your Zoom hand. I'm specifically going to call on folks who do not serve on the subcommittee that drafted this letter. And please be succinct as possible with your remarks. All right, I don't think anybody that's not serving on the subcommittee has any comments or questions or revisions, which is great. Seems like it's a really great letter, which I think it is. So I would like to open the floor for any motions. Okay, Leah?
I think it's a wonderful letter and I move to approve.
We have a draft.
Do I have a second to Leah's motion to approve the letter? Okay. Lori seconded the motion. Thank you. And then I'll open the space for any comments or questions for the motion to approve this letter. Okay, Bill?
Oh, thank you. I did have a couple questions, so I'm just asking, in the draft letter, in the key points, are the second and third points duplicative? Could they be combined?
On the key points? Oh, okay.
I have a comment about that. I actually looked at that bill when I was editing it and I decided that they are different enough that I just left them as they are, but I was tempted to do away with one of them. So I know what you're saying.
Thank you, Bill.
Yes, thank you.
And then Terry?
I think somewhat related to what Bill just said and that quick little conversation, we amend the motion to make some editorial changes to what went out to the group, because there were some, and I think a little fix here and there might still be in the works. And can we just sort of allow for that in the motion that was made?
So we have an amendment to just provide some editorial grammatical switches, but it doesn't change the essence of the letter, correct?
Right, I'm not allowed to make that motion because
Okay.
I'm still an alternate. But yes, that's the gist of it.
Well, I will put forward that amendment to the Leah's original motion.
I'll accept it.
Thank you. Okay, any other final questions or comments, Bill?
Yeah, I had a second one, and it's probably, just my misunderstanding. In the in the informative table comparing cities, in the last column, I discern that the total, for example, for Austin, 38, is the sum of the prior two columns. But what I'm wondering is, how do I compare that total or, to the council size and the FTE per counselor? For example, in Austin, I could multiply 11 by 3 to get 33. So I'm wondering, how do we tell the reader, or how do I interpret that total?
If I can try and answer that, I mean, you're sort of correct. And maybe a little clarity on the table's columns, but FTE per counselor, is intended to be the personal staff of the council's office. So in the Portland proposal that we heard earlier, that's the one staff person per counselor that's going to happen, that they get to hire and direct. The other, at that last column, is the combined council staffing that operates the full council. So that's shared staff, but also the staff of a council president or presiding officer. So that they are separate things.
Terry, yeah, that helps. Maybe under centralized staff, and in parentheses, one could have includes FTE per counselor. I mean, then if I read it, I know where my 11 times 3 goes.
Thank you, Bill, for that feedback on how we can optimize that graph. Any other questions or comments for that first amendment to approve the letter with the amendment that we just changed some grammatical tables that doesn't change the essence of the letter? No. So I will move to a roll call for votes, either yay, nay, or abstain. And I'll turn that over to Julia.
Yes, thank you. So this is recommendations. So we would need 8 affirmative votes. I'm gonna go, I think this is alphabetical order by last name. Leah.
Yes.
David. Is absent. Jane.
Yes.
Jose.
Yes.
Money is absent. Lori.
Yes.
Jill.
Yes.
Juliet.
Yes.
Zach.
With those suggested changes, I'm a yes.
Destiny.
Yes.
Bobby is absent. Fred.
That's a yes.
Thank you, Fred. Amy R.
Yes.
Juanita. Juanita, can you hear me?
Juanita, you're on mute.
Yes, I know. I just sorry about that. Yes.
Thank you, Juanita. Amy W.
Yes.
That is 11 yeses, so it passes.
Amazing. Thank you for the amazing work on that letter. Then I'm going to hold the space again for any other motions that might like to be raised?
Yeah, I would like to follow up with the motion about the following on community engagement. I move that a few committee volunteers come to the March 2024 GTAC meeting for specific recommendations for improving community engagement. The recommendations must include the proposed scope and outline and the audience for a separate targeted letter to the city. The need for improvement recommendations is inclusive of, but not limited to, council offices, including topics such as civic life, the future of neighborhood district coalitions, budgeting for districts and other in-district events, like town halls and staffing for improved citywide community engagement.
This is Zach. I would second that motion.
The motion is seconded. I'm going to hold space for comments and questions. All right, I'm going to go with Joe.
Two things. Juanita, I presume that that list of topics that you ran through is not exhaustive, that if the group decides that there are additional topics, you'll do that. And I want to make sure that we have a really streamlined process for doing this, that it doesn't take us a long, long time. I think the idea of doing letters to the appropriate people is a very good thing for this group to be doing. And I hope that we can create a process where we can do that effectively, efficiently. And I think that people shouldn't be seeing the letter for the first time at the next meeting. So, I'm not going to propose a process now, but, this ought to be a sort of template for what we do in the future.
Good job. Leah, I see that your hand went down. I don't know if you wanted to.
No, I realized I could put it in the chat, but I'll just say now. I'm like, I think it's great. I want to volunteer to help with it. Love it, Juanita. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
I should say that I put my name too for volunteering.
I appreciate this, and I want to volunteer, and I support it, and look forward to helping with it. This sort of arose out of this last letter because we realized that council staff is going to be instrumental in community engagement with council members, but it just didn't fit in this letter. And it's a bigger issue and a bigger problem and something that is important. So I support doing the separate letter and getting it done timely so it can be as part of this budget process, because that's where it's going to matter the most.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Amy?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as somebody who worked on writing this letter, about the process that, like so many kind of other things that we have researched a lot and have a lot of background on and wanted to include in communications. And it was like dawning on us all that it's very important that we kind of are sharing the research, because at this point we've done quite a bit of work as a group and we need to focus on sharing that out as much as possible. So this letter is a great start. I love the idea, Joe, of having a process, like a more formalized way of getting our ideas out into the ether.
Thank you, Amy. And I'll just take a moment to say that I'm so happy that we approved that previous letter to recommend adjusting to increase city council staffing. It's amazing the work that the GTAC council has been able to bring together and to craft something so amazing, and then to pass it together as a committee is really huge. Bringing that work out of the subcommittee. And thank you, Juanita, for bringing on this motion to get some more volunteers who have been informed and been doing the research to propose a scope, an outline, and an audience for a separate letter on improving our community engagement when we talk about a new government. And so I just wanted to show my gratitude again for your work. I mean, we had a lot of presentations today from amazing people, and they're charging this work every day, and we show up a lot. And so I want to thank you again with gratitude. And so I don't think there was a lot of people already volunteering to get on this work. So I'm going to pass it over to Julia to do a roll call.
Okay, we're gonna go the other direction. So W's, Amy Wood, I'm looking at you.
You restate the motion.
Sorry.
It was the motion that Juanita shared to author a second, or to work towards authoring a second letter that's around community engagement. Paraphrasing, but that was out of the room.
Okay, Amy W.
Yes.
Juanita.
Yes.
Amy R.
Yes.
Fred.
Yes.
Bobby is absent. Destiny.
Yes.
Zach.
Yes.
Juliet.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Lori.
Yes.
Lenny is absent. Jose.
Yes.
Jane.
Yes.
David is absent. Leah.
Yes.
Okay, that's 12 yeses. So that passes.
Fabulous. And then I see people volunteering. Please put it in the chat if you volunteer to take on this work. It's really exciting. And so from there, I'm going to pass it over to Zach.
Great. I think this is our last agenda item, which will be with June, improving engagement around the budget. Our work plan includes recommending tools or additional resources to improve that engagement around the budget. And June, take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is June Reyes. I use she, her pronouns, the Transition Engagement Coordinator. And what I wanted to do is provide an overview of a proposed scope of work for a work group of GTAC to complete item F3 in our work plan. And so that item is to recommend tools or additional resources to improve engagement around the budget to the city budget office. And so really what this draft scope is meant to do is help gauge your interest in working on this to join a work group and advance this work. And so what we're looking at is a deliverable that would be a document outlining recommended strategies for improving community engagement in the new city budget process. We plan on considering feedback from the Charter Commission on Participatory Budgeting, community and stakeholder input, and research on best practices from other city budgeting processes. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about the roles and responsibilities. And so the first is who this letter or recommendation would be directed to. And that would be the city budget office, but we also feel like also based on some input from the city budget office, it would be beneficial to also send it to the future city administrator and future elected officials. And then when we're looking at developing this recommendation, I want to point out that for this, we would have GTAC would be approving the final recommendation, but the GTAC work group would be needing to develop this recommendation. The transition staff would support implementation of engagement that we do and support, meetings, et cetera. And, to be able to create some robust recommendations, we would think that there would be two main inputs into the process. So the first is gaining a community perspective via public comment, interviewing stakeholder groups, and the lived experiences of folks on the GTAC work group. And we would also have the city budget office provide us technical information so that we're really understanding how we can be impactful with these. And so I wanted to end with a slide on what our timeline would look like. And so what this timeline does is it works back from a fall 2004 recommendation, and that follows the district and council subcommittee recommendations on the things that the scope for that subcommittee. And so we would want to form a work group this month and have GTAC approve that scope. We would want from March to May, collect and gather feedback and information. And so that might include stakeholder interviews, peer city research, community listening sessions, et cetera. And then from June to August, the work group would draft recommendations based on that information and send it out for public comment in the summer. And then the work group, based on that information, could make changes to the draft that would then move forward to GTAC for approval in the fall. And again, this mirrors the timeline for the districts and council operations subcommittee. And then, is there anything else there? No. This is where I say, if you are interested, email Julia and the co-chairs if you'd like to participate. Oh, that was fast. And then I'll pass it to you, Destiny.
That was very fast. Questions? Yes, Fred?
So we wouldn't be making recommendations for this budget cycle, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, it's a little late to start cranking up, but they seem to be moving ahead full bore. Okay, yeah, thank you. No, I think it's exciting.
I have a question. So Mike Jordan sadly already left, but he was talking about the changes in the budget system that we're going to be having in the new government. So I'm wondering if this work group should understand those changes a little bit better so that this recommendation isn't outdated from when we approve it.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be important to point out that the city budget office is really committed to being a technical partner and providing us time to give us the information we need to be able to make those recommendations. And they've already committed to that and have seen these pieces of the presentation.
Thank you, Jen. Liz, I have a question from Jane.
Thank you so much. Maybe it's because it's 10 to 8 and I'm a bit brain dead. But did we say that we would take this on? Were we asked by the city budget office to help create a more robust community strategy for getting information out about the budget? Can somebody remind me of that?
I can remind a little bit. When we were going through the GTAC work plan process, it was suggested and then approved in the work plan. So
okay, thank you. Then I had just forgotten that little snippet, which I think would be important to kind of put up there that we've been tasked with it and we have to do it, and that's a good thing. Great.
But to that really quick, I would want to point out that when we were going through the work plan process, this was one of the work plan items that was outside some of the letters or the scoping letters that was provided by the mayor and Mike Jordan. And so it is a welcome addition. And I just wanted to also point that out. This is also the group's decision on pursuing this task.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
I'm going to put it in the chat, but just for everyone to understand that the city is, I think, participating with Portland State, the Hatfield School of Government, on a participatory budgeting process group through Oregon's Kitchen Table, I think it's called. It's mostly younger people, but how to be more, how budget processes can be more open. They're having an all-day workshop on Saturday the 17th, I think it is. They sent a link to everybody on the chat line. I know I've registered. It's free. You can, if you've got the resources to pay for lunch, I welcome that. That should be an interesting, outside of the scope of, the city bureaucracy or GTAC and the transition team sense of budgeting possibilities.
Thank you, Fred. And I think Jose said you were planning to go to that.
Yes, I have to move things around.
Maybe.
I go to that.
So we'll get even more abundance and information in this work group, which we love. Amy also plans to go. Exciting. We're just talking about this event, so fabulous. Any other, okay, look, so I think when you're typing in the chat, you're also volunteering for this work group. Any other questions for the work group regarding community engagement improvements for the budget? If not. Joe?
I think this is probably naive, but it's at least conceivable that as they start doing their research in February, March, that recommendations could come up that are relevant to this year's budget process. And I don't want to eliminate that possibility, and I want to make sure that we've got a fast track process for making those recommendations if they come up.
Thank you. And then Terry?
Never mind.
Okay. Thank you. I hear you, Joe. Definitely having to process, streamline how we get more engaged with these letters. Well, if that's the case, I'll pass it back over to Zach.
Great. Well, I think I'm personally surprised that we finished ahead of schedule, but I guess that is the benefit of losing one agenda item. So as always, I know there were a lot of questions that may have been unanswered in chat, so be tuned to the fact that those will be answered offline and will be posted online later. The recording of this meeting will be also posted to the committee's website and is available after the meeting ends on the Office of Management and Finance YouTube channel. The fourth meeting of the voter and candidate education and outreach subcommittee is Tuesday, February 13th. And the fourth meeting of the districts and council operations subcommittee is next Thursday, February 22nd. I think that's 2 Thursdays from now. I'm not mistaken. But our next regular full committee meeting is Wednesday, March 13th. Next slide, please. This slide shows the upcoming meeting schedule, and at our March meeting, we anticipate hearing more about recommendations of districts and council operation, initial onboarding recommendations from the district and council operations subcommittee, discussing the city administrator recruitment, which again, I encourage you to go back to the slides and ask preliminary questions so that that can be a useful time with our DHR's contractor, and reviewing the outcomes of the impact metrics for the transition. Next slide, please. Thank you all for participating tonight, and this meeting is adjourned.
So Zach, what a great idea. You put in a